Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Yeah, I want you to stop. I want you to stop and put the brakes on for a reason. This is Brake Safety Week for commercial vehicles. We're going to talk about that today and what's involved. How many brake violations are there? He deals with this all the time. He's worked as an investigator. He's been in the trenches, if you will. Now he owns a company that works with motor carrier companies to make sure that they are truly safe. And this is Safety First with Matt Freeman. Matt, how you doing today?
Hey, doing well, doing good, Steve. It's was it Tuesday? The week's already gotten started. Let's see what happens here.
Don't put the brakes on. Get to the weekend.
Exactly. I'm moving forward.
It's so funny. I literally just said, as I was driving in here, I dropped my daughter off and I said, yeah. And she just started driving. So I was like, yeah, I got to get the brakes done on the car because I can feel it. I have that feeling that it's time. I'm not hearing the warning track, the squeal or anything like that, but it's on my radar. How does that work with commercial motor vehicles and their brakes? I know inspections are going on with roadside officers taking care of that, but how does somebody in a 80,000 pound vehicle know that the brakes, it's time to change them?
Well, commercial motor vehicles, they got to have what they call a preventive maintenance program. So every so often, they're required to bring the vehicles in. They get annual checks, maintenance done on them. Brakes is the most important thing, wheels and brakes. That's what's keeping these big, heavy vehicles going down the road. But real quick, let's back up. This
Sure.
week, August 25th, Brake Week started. CVSA puts that on the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to do all the training for all your commercial officers out there.
Hmm.
Do roadside inspections. It's your troopers. That's everybody. If scale houses, all those guys are trained through CVSA, an association I've been a member of since I was in enforcement. So, but what they're doing here is, the influence is on brakes, right? So on the road, they do their normal routine checks on the roadside. But they're, again, since it's brake week, their focus is to to do a double check on those brakes. Anything that's wrote up as violations, any issues they may find, we'll go into all that here. That's what they're going to be reporting on out of the norm, what they normally do. So that's the key focus here.
Hmm.
Those brakes are important. How important are they? If you didn't have those heavy duty brakes, these vehicles wouldn't be able to stop. If they're malfunctioning, um, it's going to cause issues. Again, these are heavy loads, so the brakes got to be working. That's the bottom line. If there's any issues, sometimes the drivers may notice them. They'll see a smoking brake. As they're doing their walk around pre-trip inspections. If anything stands out, they need to be noting that. Keep them trucks off
Hmm.
the road if any issues that they may see. That could be leaking seals. That could be uh, anything. It's just again out of the norm. You gotta uh, any type of levers hanging down where they're not normally hanging down. Your push rods, things like that. So there's a lot of things too. Not just having brakes, but they do a lot of things for that vehicle.
Can you educate us on the types of brakes that are in these types of vehicles? I hear air brakes. Are there traditional pads in every type of vehicle like that?
Yeah, so there's different types of brakes. You have your everyday air brakes that you have your pads, okay, just like your vehicle.
Hmm.
They have disc brakes who operate differently, where they compress, as a disc brake. They have wedge brakes. Wedge brakes will press out instead of just your normal pad brake. Um, I don't want to get too granular on it, but there are different types of brakes depending. Also, you had different types of stroke brakes. There's a regular stroke, long stroke, and what that is on those push rods. The push rod, when you hit that brake, the rod that comes out, that's what's give that air pressure is pushing that to allow pressure onto the pad, okay, or the disc, whatever it's working with, right? So um, those there's a limitation on that push rod. Okay, so if it expands out too far, that's showing you that it's not connecting strong enough. Okay, so the tighter it is, better the more compression you're going to be getting on that brake, right? Or that wheel with that brake pad. So what happens is they go underneath the vehicle and they measure the push rods with a ruler. So if that push rod is pushed out so far, so they crawl under and they holler out, hey driver, this is after everything's all safety features are put in place, the vehicle's, at a stop, everything's chalked, it's not going to roll on you. You crawl under, you're yelling out, hey driver, apply your brakes. The driver applies his brakes, you go under with a tape measure or whatever you have for measuring, okay? You measure and see how far that push rod is out, okay? So if that push rod exceeds that limit, now you have a brake out, okay? And depending on how many brakes that you have, if each brake exceeds that limit, now you may have a possible out of service for all those brakes, okay? Therefore, the vehicle is not allowed to move any farther. So there's a formula to that as well.
Wow.
So it just depends. There's depending on the vehicle, depending on the trailer, how it's built. There's different styles of brakes. It just depends on the designer of the trailer and what brakes they put on the systems.
Is there any indication to the driver that the brakes are, like I mentioned, with our cars, typically there's a warning track. You hear, a squeal, some kind of metal noise that indicates, you might want to look at your brakes. You might probably need to be replaced. Is there anything that goes on with these vehicles that would let the driver know?
It's more of a checking system. It's knowing your brakes. If you're going along, they need, it's just like a vehicle. You tap in your brakes, making sure everything's working. You're giving yourself some distance to apply the brakes. If the brakes aren't working, you're not going to stop. Just some pretty general rules when it comes to that. But some of the key factors to look out for, just to give you an idea, okay, of things that these guys may see, may not as a driver, right? So I had the results here. I pulled up some results here from 2023. It usually takes a few months for the results to come out after they do a check.
Sure.
In 2023, it looks like they had just under 19,000 vehicles stopped between Canada, U.S., and Mexico. Okay, during that week of brake check in 2023. Okay, so out of that check, contaminated brakes, out of those 18,000 vehicles, okay, contaminated brakes, they had was 40% contaminated out of that 18,000.
How do you define contaminated?
It could be a leaking brake. It could be some type of oil or any type of grease on the brakes, anything that would cause the brake not to perform its duties because of some type of liquid or something on that brake. Okay?
Sure.
It could be on the pad, it could be the seals busted, it could be a lot of different things as a contaminated brake. Cracks and voids, it could be cracked brake pads, splitting brake pads, actual broken brakes. 28% out of that 18,000. Okay. Actually, it's 28.74, so almost 29% out of 18,000 trucks stopped. And this is the truck and the trailer we're looking at here. So it's not just the truck itself. It can be the trailer. Okay. Loose or missing. Pads completely gone. Or you got brake issues loose, or 10%. It happens. Those are kind of things you might be noticed if the driver's getting done and he's actually looking. You may see something. If it's dangling, I've seen it more than once. And surprised the driver says, "Oh, caught me by surprise. I didn't know that was like that." I'm glad you pulled in because I looked at your brakes. Worn brakes, 20%. You would think that would actually be higher. Personally, I think that would have been the highest one.
Yeah.
As being honest, but contaminated is the most. So those are just some. This is what they look for last year. Now, what are they looking at? Okay, what kind of brakes are they looking at? And you kind of ask the question, what do they do, and how important is this? So they're looking at let's see, the brake systems. Okay, make sure the brake system's working itself. Okay, there's different checks that you do. Linings, pads, So anything that has to do with that brake, that is the component itself, okay, the cam that holds the pancake in. Now we call it a pancake, but it's the so when the brakes are applied. Um, to things like the push rods had to be connected. Okay, they have automatic slack adjusters now, so they automatically adjust the brakes as required. Um, like we were talking about, if those brakes aren't adjusted, they're going to be out of adjustment, right? So then therefore they're sticking farther out than what they're required. Again, if it's out of its realm too far, then again there's criteria on how far it can be out. Okay, so out of adjustment wise. So if it's, for instance, if it's a type 30 long stroke or type 30 regular brake, okay, this is the size of the cam. Okay, it just depends on what it is and when they're going to put it out of place there. So they're going to be looking at that. I have seen personally brand new trailers come off the lines with the slack adjusters just dangling off of the brake shaft and not even put on there because of just not paying attention. And
Whoa.
I've had customers who buy in my past, or technically I was not a consultant at the time. I was in enforcement. For instance, had a gentleman come up and say, "Hey, I got a brand new truck here. I'm looking for you to inspect it. I can't wait. I'm going to get a good inspection here." And I crawled underneath there, and that's the first thing I saw: slack adjusters just dangling. They weren't even connected on two of his brakes, and he was, needless to say, he was very upset. So things happen, but this is why you have maintenance guys and folks that need to really be checking these trucks. It's all about safety. It's all about knowing what's going down the road. Just because it's a brand new vehicle or brand new trailer does not mean it's always going to be safe. Now you hope it will, right? Things happen, but that was something that slipped through the cracks there. Well, again, he wasn't allowed to go anywhere until he was able to fix those brakes, those slack adjusters. But still, it was a minor thing. Now, um, what's a big thing here? Why are they doing this? What's the importance of this? Doing brake checks for an emphasis this week. It's about safety. It's about educating. It's about maintaining your trucks and your trailers when they're going down the road. And these officers aren't there just to, pull you over and write you a bunch of citations. It's about making sure, hey, the focus this week is on brakes. This is where we're going to focus at. Let's make sure you're being safe. Your brakes are good. We don't see you get hurt. Anybody else going on the road. Again, you have to be able to stop. If you can't stop, we got a lot of problems. And we know what can happen.
What's the violations for, let's say a brake issue? Is the company on the hook? Is there any responsibility with the driver? Every situation is different. Any guesstimate on what a fine might be?
Well, it's going to depend on the state and where the violation comes from.
Sure.
That really is. So a lot of states have their own violations or penalties per violation. Okay, so it's going to depend on the state. Are all the regular citations and stuff? Regulations come from the federal government that the states have adopted. Okay, so it could be, I'm just going to throw out there, it could be $100 a violation to and up, depending on the state and what their penalties are on those violations.
That's kind of low, I think.
Yeah, but it could be more. You got to see, because it's just like you got your traffic ticket and then you have your inspection form. So you got different levels of what you're looking at for violation wise. Okay, depending on if it's an out of service violation, it could be higher. I can't talk for another state.
Right.
Now, when you do an internal investigations and you're doing terminal inspections and you find violations, those all add up into the report that you put together. So there could be penalties that come out of that as well. And depending on the company, so you asked another question with that is, it's the company's responsibility. If it's an owner operator, I own my own truck and company, my own LLC, or if it is a large fleet and I own all of them, it's the company's responsibility to keep those vehicles maintained. And one of my biggest emphasis with all my customers is safety. And maintenance is a very passion of mine, which it is most consultants in my field, that they keep these vehicles maintained well. Because the last thing you want is something to happen because, especially a brake goes out, or you're not, or even a tire or wheel that hasn't been changed when required to be, changed.
Hmm.
Brakes are the same way. Um,
Wow.
those, you got your wheel, tire, and brakes, they all go together. And then you got the axle, right? So if you got if you got brake heating up on you, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So there's a lot of issues, a lot of things that can cause those things.
Have you, in memory, know of any accidents that were caused because of faulty brakes?
Several.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. Um, you get a brake burning up. Next thing you know, brake something catches on fire.
Hmm.
But
Wow.
motor coach buses, I've seen that happen on motor coach buses. Some of these fires have started on these motor coach buses because of the brakes heating up, fire catches. Next thing you know, the whole bus is caught on fire. Um, that's a whole nother topic, is motor coach stuff. But yeah, it happens. But you ever drive down the road and you see a smoking brake, you smell that stink,
Yeah.
from behind a truck. Sometimes it's the heat up from the brake. Sometimes the driver knows, sometimes he don't. If it's in the very back, obviously, where the axles and wheels are on the trailer, you may not notice it right off the bat. But
You would
I
think
guarantee.
in this day of technology, Matt, that there would be some kind of warning, but I guess, some of these rigs are older, right? And I don't even know what the newer ones have in terms of technology, but not a lot of newer vehicles will tell you, you have a brake issue or the brake pads are
Mhm.
wearing down. Mine, I'm an older, not that old, but it doesn't have that technology. It does other things, but I would think, the newer ones would tell you something that's so important like that.
Yeah, and some of the things that they have to have in their vehicle, since they are ran by air, they got to have so much air pressure built up to operate those brakes. There are warning devices that go off in the vehicle that let that driver know he has no air pressure. So there are warning devices let him know,
Okay.
say, for whatever reason. So that is one of the things that you are required to check during roadside. It has to be set at a certain PSI, can't go below that, showing it's holding pressure with the vehicle running. So if you're one of the requirements is you pump the brakes down to a certain pressure, see if it holds, and if anything happens before that, then you may have a violation there. So you got to make
Wow.
sure that
Hmm.
ABS is working,
Sure.
uh, the pressures are working and staying or holding pressure during the time of the inspection. So there are key things. They will know if the air goes out, you don't have no brakes.
I was going to ask you that question because I remember 2 years ago, I also have a older Jeep. I just use it for the beach, kayaking. I mean, it's rusting away, but I love it because it's a piece of garbage, but I love
It's
it.
fun. It's
I,
fun.
I shouldn't say it's a piece of garbage. I send positive energy to it because I used to beat on it and tell it, you're a piece of junk, and it would just belch would break fail. Now I'm like, when I get in it, I appreciate you. You are the best, and haven't had an issue. But anyway, um, I lost brakes 2 years ago, pulling out of a parking lot that was on an incline, and there was traffic right there. And at that moment, I'm like, what am I going to do? I quickly turned. There was a turn back into the parking lot, like last minute. But to drive it home and then to get it fixed, there were, even though I busted a brake line, so I guess that's two wheels that didn't have because I think they're opposite of each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
I didn't have those were gone. So I could apply the brakes, but you have to get on the pedal and drive slower, just so you can make it home. But there is something. So in these big rigs, when they lose air pressure, is there any redundancy backup plan that, in that situation?
Um, you know, knowing the air they're going to have to break that, whether you do have your emergency brakes,
Okay. All right.
if they
There's a
do have an
point.
emergency brake, okay. All I suppose you can set that emergency brake,
Hmm.
or apply that emergency brake. But that's the only other braking system they have besides for your, um, and if everything's operated by air, it just depends, really. I think it's going to depend on the situation.
Isn't it
Like,
funny? We don't remember we have emergency brakes in our cars. And the only time you usually set them is if you're concerned, if you're on a really steep hill, it's like, yeah, I better put that thing on there. Aside from that, when you lose your brakes, like it's the last thing you're thinking because it's out of sight, out of mind. We don't even think of it, but it's called emergency brake for a reason.
mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, and even when if I remember right, going through driving school when I was young, they said, "Hey, when you park, you should always put your emergency brake on. When you do certain
Yes.
things, use your emergency brake."
Yes.
I I've ran into two issues. Have an old pickup truck, and then I had a new pickup truck. Did the same thing with it. I never used the brake when I decided to use the brake. I had one that had the old kick it down, just like the old Jeeps
I,
do,
I I know where
foot
this is
pedal.
going. Go ahead.
Anyway, you're not used to using it. You go get back in the car, put it in gear, take off. You hear a snap. You just
Yeah.
pop. I went through
Pop the
so many
cable.
emergency brakes. Yep.
Yeah. I've
Yep.
same exact thing. Or it got stuck
Yep.
because
I've
it's
had that
never
happen too.
used because it's not lubricated, it's not moving, and it's funny now. I'm bringing back memories. My mom used to always say, "Put the brake on, put the emergency brake on." Like I think it's like an old school thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, especially if you're on a hill, and you have some concern. I mean, today's vehicles usually lock into gear, but you never know. Or I'm surrounded by water where I live. So if we take a ferry, I'll usually put it on.
Mhm.
Sometimes if
Makes sense.
especially if your vehicle is parked closer to the edge, and that happened once, and they chalk the definitely emergency brake situation with that. Learned a lot today, Matt. There's I assume that they were doing roadside checks, but never knew what they were doing them for, and didn't even consider brakes would be one of those things. This is just a part of what you offer, the insight to companies that you work with. What's your website? How do we find you? If somebody's got a question, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, you guys can find me on at dottrainingsolutions.com. We have a new website. Our podcasts are on the website too. So come check us out. Uh, Lots of training classes. Everything about safety and compliance we can offer you is there. Um, you can also reach me you can go info at dottrainingsolutions.com or reach me personally at Matt, M-A-T-T, at dottrainingsolutions.com. And my direct number, I always give it out, is 573 416 8203.
Wow. We just scraped the surface today on this. This
Just a
goes
little
way
bit.
and exactly. That's about the material on the brake pad.
Right,
We're
right.
scraping the surface. There's so much more that you offer these companies to make sure they're safe, keep their reputation, avoid the violations, and so much more. So for that, Matt, I appreciate it. Thank you for being here today.
All right. Hey, thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
It's always fun. See
Same.
ya.
We'll catch up soon. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down,
It's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.